Hi, my name is Erick Bourgeois. I work at RBC Capital Markets. I run the platform team there with hundreds and hundreds of developers running their applications on our platform. I am a GitOps evangelist at the company, very much so, that I kind of get annoying about it. But I love doing it, love presenting to it. Proudly Canadian, obviously, given the name of the bank. And been working in this regulated environment for 23 plus years. Previously, there was the Morgan Stanley team that was up here. That was actually my old team that I worked with. And I just have to note, disclosure, that everything that I'm talking about is not that of RBC or the opinion of them. This is my opinion and what I am saying.
Thanks, Eric. Just a little bit of GitOps history is Morgan Stanley is responsible for a lot of the early success, I would say, because they read some of the initial blog posts and said, hey, this sounds interesting. Can we come and talk about it? So if you're in that position with the technology, if you're a big user, that kind of thing counts for a very great deal. You should always do it. I've been involved in several companies and most recently have started ConfigHub with Brian Grant from Kubernetes and Jesper Jørgensen from Heroku and Twilio. We'll drop into that a little bit today. We'll also highlight the major Flux integration that Eric has sponsored with the control plane team as well involved. So hopefully that'll be interesting. Oh, hang on.
I got it. All right, so we want to start with this. We want to go into this journey into what I call config hell. As I've gone through this several times, and one of the biggest one is, as Francesco had just mentioned, was an issue with the Grafana config map that we had. But before we start, I wanted to know how many people store their config in Git. That's pretty much what I thought. How many people have pipelines against that? Pretty much everyone, right? And how many actively have, or actually have, linting against those pipelines, the config? It starts to go down, right? Okay. All right. So this probably is very familiar, right? We have platform, Git repo that has a ton of Helm charts where we have our config, and some of those might even be very specific to the clusters themselves that we're deploying on. Then we have some GitHub action or Jenkins, if you're still using Jenkins. Have some YAML linting in there, kube conform, we got a build. Ideally, maybe you want to be building to an OCI image, which is what we do. So then we store that in Artifactory, and then finally, our OCI repository sucks that in from Flux, right? I think that's pretty common workflow right now. Okay, here's a config that we had put out, and this is actually a config map data of a config file of inside text. So now we've got YAML inside text inside YAML, right? This stuff is not easy to lint, and actually it's impossible. And in fact, when we rolled this out, it looked fine. Everything was completely fine. So what we call YAMLception, right? So we've got all this config within config. And the reason for this is to roll out our values files for our Helm release, okay, in Flux. All right, so then these two combined with the release, boom, big, huge mess, right? What I like to call my little config reaper here, coming to take down my applications. And what the cause was that one little space between two namespaces. So if we just go back really quick, you'll see these spaces between foo and baz, or bar. That one little space caused a complete outage across all of our Grafanas. Okay, so we store and keep all of our Grafana locally, one instance of the actual deployment, but we actually use that across multiple clusters. So that one change caused everything to blow up. All right, so in an enterprise, operations are really not developers, right? They are inherently risk adverse. They do not want to make changes, right? Devs, that's what we're bred to do. We want to. Or platform engineers, we want to make changes. We want to move forward, right? So in a highly regulated environment where, we can't afford to not dispense money, right? So we have to be very, very, very careful about the changes that we make. So where are we now? I guess some people do know that YouTube. We're in a maze of
I just want to check, actually. There's nobody in the room who is the person on the screen here.
That'd be awesome. I'd love to meet him. So we've got, umbrella charts. We've got charts within charts. We've got all these values files. We have, sophisticated Helm charts like Grafana, which has a ton of different values. And then we have, Flux that has to take that and put it out, right? This is extremely fragile at scale. And this is what we came to realize. Alexis.
Yeah, so that was a good example of what I've been calling config sprawl, where you've got lots of different files in lots of different repos owned by different people, different templates which make different formats at different times, connecting to lots of different systems. Sometimes you have special systems like Vault that have some extra things in them that you're going to need dynamically later on. And controlling this and managing it is getting harder and harder and harder. And if you look at the statistics, you'll see people like the Dora folks who are now at Google will show evidence that the speed of DevOps just has not got any faster. And that wasn't what we hoped would happen when nearly 10 years ago, we and others came up with these new automated technologies around Kubernetes. We thought we would make things easier, more automated, safer, more compliant. And instead, people seem to be getting more and more stuck. And that's partly because systems have grown, and we're the victims of our own success. So that's a good thing. So really what the new approach is that we've been investigating is the idea of configuration as data. So I'll spend a couple of slides talking about what that is, and then we'll try and show you some stuff.
Yeah.
Next slide.
Yeah, I get it.
So a few words about that. I think how many of you have had a computer science degree background? About half. That's pretty good. So I went to do a master's and learned that Nicholas Wirth, who I believe is a Swiss computer scientist, had published a book called Algorithms Plus Data Equals Programs. And this idea of separating code from data came about in the late 60s, early 70s, and gave birth to some pretty amazing stuff. A database industry, which allowed people to build apps that didn't have to be directly tied to how the data was stored in every which way that you could imagine, but actually could have a separate life cycle from the data itself somewhat. And then we have the modern architecture that we have today because of that. But that has not happened with configuration. And if you look, as I said, at configuration and how important it is to every single thing that we do now in this room, it's ridiculous that we don't have a way of managing that data properly. So could those things be separated? And this is a different approach from the approach that's been taken by other teams. I've got some of them at the top of the slide. These are all great approaches, very interesting in their own right. But one thing I'll point out is that a lot of the infra as code people are tightly coupling how they manage code with how they store the data inside. So for example, if you use Pulumi, they've got some really cool ideas about secrets and data, but you have to go through the Pulumi way to get at it. But if you have configuration stored separately as data, then you can imagine having lots of different formats, languages, frameworks, programs interacting with it like you do with a business database. And so Brian Grant, who I think is in the room, will be talking again on Thursday about this. In a bit more detail, but pioneered this with a few folks at Google, like Phil Whitrock, I believe, kept Project and Porch, but very early designs and very, very much tied to Kubernetes. And we thought, what if you could go beyond that to help people doing applications, operations, and so on? So you have configuration as data plus algorithms of some kind, workers equals operations or something else instead. And so this separation has been very interesting to watch, and we've been very early in learning what it means, but we highly recommend that you investigate this pattern. And we think it's in harmony with a lot of things that have been happening in the GitOps community, like, for example, Stefan has been promoting Gitless GitOps. We never thought Git would be the only store for the source of truth, and I think what we've seen is that you do need different dedicated sources of truth for different purposes. So with ConfigHub, we have an early stage SaaS for trying this out. It makes all the configuration that you're going to need for the relevant parts of managing infra and apps centralized and provides structure so that dependencies between application components can be seen and understood in relation to history, versioning, and role, and potentially policy as well. So you can apply things like triggers and compliance and functions around that. That will allow you to do really important things that are a little tricky right now, like seeing what happens before you deploy, and then being able to check afterwards to see if that was correct. And we've been working with Erick's team, and I think what we've proven is that this can genuinely reduce the number of moving parts and the surface area for errors, and actually make people like the ops team happy. I mean, I always used to get complaints. GitOps sounds good, but it's a bit unfair on the operations team who don't want to learn dev tools or YAML to fix things. The operations team don't want to be shouted at when YAML is falling around them from the sky. So we have a nice quote from Erick here. We get all this value by eliminating the dominoes. And it is a domino effect. One thing going wrong could have an enormous blast radius elsewhere. And because this is an open source community, a lot of our own API connects to open source projects like the FluxBridge that you've sponsored, and there's an SDK for building others as well. So what is this in relation to GitOps itself? I think this, for me, is a combination of conversations that I've seen, heard, and been part of myself for 8 years now around what happens if you have something slightly more complicated than the idealized single desired state, single repo, single app, and single running system that we can all draw on the board, but turns out to be somewhat different from the general case, which might involve fleets, approvals, stages, different third-party systems, policies, and so on. Plus, something that we're really excited about is the idea that GitOps can be bidirectional, or reverse GitOps is possible. And those of you who follow the space really closely might remember debates about this about 5, 6 years ago. We had this idea that maybe we could update the GUI in an operational break glass situation, make a change immediately to the system, and then reconcile that through some kind of clever data caching transaction network, something or other, that glued it back into Git. But that's actually quite hard to implement. But we've been able to show some things, and Brian will show some examples on Thursday. So it's an evolution of GitOps, keeping within the 4 principles, but giving you more flexibility around the direction, around push versus pull, and how to mix it up for your use cases, so that you don't accidentally make a change and blat something you didn't mean to. And now it's time for a demo, which is where I shit my pants. Okay. So I'm not going to show you a full demo because there just isn't time, but I'm going to give you a sense of what you can expect. You can sign up for this now, docs.confighub.com. What you can see here is the kind of thing you'd expect to see. And by the way, we're still here at this stage of it's more like Git than GitHub. This is really for DevOpsy people today. We're really interested in your help to get it closer to the app's dream. But you can see here a list of config units, which correspond to individual, in our model, configures data. Every single running system has a one-to-one relationship with what is held in the desired state. So you don't have this don't repeat yourself one-to-many with one template and 1,000 things. Every single running system corresponds to one individual unit in the config store, which is similar to, you might have seen the rendered manifest pattern, which I think is popularized by the Argo folks. I think there's a different name for it in the world of Flux. But the basic idea is flatten all your files into fully rendered YAML, and then have a one-to-one correspondence with your running system so you can see what's actually going on. So here we have...
Not only see, is to be certain that what you do have is actually what gets deployed. So you have a one-to-one to live, what we call live on the cluster. That's really key.
And we can organize that a bit, so it doesn't have to be just a big list. And what you can see is, things like different services. This is a little shopping app, and I can click on that, and you'll see the history on the left. And let me see if this is I can edit it. There's a config there. Oh, it's some YAML underneath. This is the KRM. And we can mess about with this.
Edit.
Yeah. Edit. OK. Let's this up. All right. 2 spaces. OK,
Good old
save.
space issue in YAML.
I'm not going to put a comment in because this doesn't need commenting on. OK. And now, oh, look, there's a little red button there, apply gate. It's a bit like an admission controller. Oh, it doesn't seem to have detected any Kubernetes conformance errors there. Whoops, never mind. What if we run it? Oh, fail. The system noticed that the 2 extra spaces and this particular thing was not allowed.
And again, this is before we even touch the cluster, right? All within here.
So this is a way of bringing configuration into one place and managing it for you to prevent a problem similar to, not identical to Erick's particular Grafana problem, but spaces were criminally involved in this one. And if we go back to the config, let me just point out how easy it would be to make the mistake. Who can see on the screen quickly where the mistake is?
117.
You're paying too much attention.
You looked at the line number.
Because it lines up, it's easy to miss. And this is the kind of thing that does happen, especially in a operations environment. Here's another one of those little red buttons. Let's see if I dig into that, what am I going to find? More apply gates. Do this again. Oh, something else happened. This is a different part of the system. And actually what happened there was I ran a whole functional expression as a trigger on an application. So this is closer to the world of OPA and Kyverno. But imagine something that's optimized for dealing with configuration only. So you're not dealing with a general purpose policy language, which can talk about something totally imaginary, but just around configuration. And I'm just going quickly through it because I don't want to spend too long. But this is what we call a trigger. And they're associated with, oops, there's a whole lot of triggers in this space. So we don't have time to do it all today. But you can easily read about it in the wonderful docs, which are on the docs site, which I highly recommend having a look at.
We'll show at the end.
And get started and so on. So there we go.
Slides.
What am I going to do? Back to the slides and back to slideshow.
Yep.
That one.
Okay, cool.
Oops.
Oh.
Oh, this is, by the way, quickly.
Yep.
This is how to catch Erick's specific Grafana problem. Now, admit this might be a somewhat adventurous piece of regex for all of you, but as you can see on the screen, this is actually making a serious effort to dig inside that inner YAML and find the patterns that potentially cause the illegality in the first place. Cool. So it is, in principle, possible to solve it.
I got it. All right, cool. Since we're at FluxCon, how does this integrate with Flux, right? We've just been talking about, the problem, potential solution, a very good one. How does this integrate? So thanks, 2.7 release, thanks to Stefan and the team, put out a new part of the RFC for external artifacts. This is a new CRD that allows for what we call an external source now for Flux. So it allows us, or ConfigHub worker, to become now this new source of truth, okay? What they call a Flux bridge. So this Flux bridge now keeps in sync with ConfigHub, and then actually creates the external artifact and the customization, and keeps all of that now in sync. So now we've got this bridge, and we continue to keep Flux in this flow, right? And that was always key for me, is to always have this reconciliation loop with that same config. We wanted to be absolutely sure that what we were putting out there, that's what I needed, was to shift all of that to the left as much as I could, right? So that I did not have to worry about what was actually being put. And then I also didn't have to change my, my platform and using Flux, right? That was very, very important to me. So once we have that, now we have the customization controller that just puts everything, reconciles everything onto the cluster, right? So the real change is a very minor, this bridge, nice name, perfect name for it, bridging that gap between ConfigHub and Flux. Okay, cool.
press
This is the Flux Bridge demo. So this is, can you guys see that? Well, I'm hoping. No, eh? Okay, you know what? We're gonna do Alexis
Yeah.
real quick.
That one?
Yep,
Yeah.
I got it. All right. So in the top right, you're gonna have, yeah, I'm doing it. Oh. All right. Sorry? William. Okay, on the right, we have the list of pods, right? So what we want to do is actually modify the config and increase the deployment count, okay? So on the left-hand side, you're seeing the list of the new sources and, customization. Now, on the top left, you'll find that we have the logs for the new Flux Bridge. So now we're going to go there. We're going to make that change. And again, we can do all of this in the CLI or UI. Maybe we never actually said that, but yes, there's a full CLI that we can use to modify this. So we're showing this replica count as 1, okay? And we're going to make the change. So that's the live state. That's the state that this unit is in. Now we'll make that change here. We'll change that to 3. And on the left-hand side, you're going to see that apply when we actually apply the actual change. So just making that change doesn't make it actually live, as you can see. We have to cub apply. We have to apply that change into the cluster. So again, we validated, those triggers ran, everything seems okay. So now we'll do the cub unit apply onto that space, and then we'll see this spit out the full change, and then we'll go back and look at those deployments increase. So there it is. As we get the replica count to 3, now it is completed from the worker perspective, successfully processed, and eventually it'll exit out here on the right. Done, and now we look at the actual state, right? The live state. And we'll see 3. And another thing to note is that we are still compliant with, the revision history, the changes, right? So that revision history of customization increased from 8 to 9, right? Again, keeping in line with the Flux, the way Flux operates. And there you go. At the end, now we have the 3 deployments. So we could do that all through the command line or through the UI. All right, let's go back. I don't know how much time we have. We have time check?
Yeah, we got 2 minutes. Keep going.
All right. So here's a before and after, right? We've got this, let me get in slideshow. We've got this large number of possible places where things can go wrong, right? I've got a Git repo, I've got a GitHub action, I've got all of this infra as well, right, that I've got to manage or be responsible for. And now I can combine that into one place where I manage all of this, which is very key for me as a platform engineer owner. I need to be able to validate, mutate, and query this data, right? That's the key thing I would really like you guys to take away from this. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but these are big benefits that we are seeing as a customer of this. Really, I think the one I'd highlight the most is the first one, is that reduced blast radius, right? So again, being able to validate that way before it ever gets to my cluster as soon as possible is so key for any production issue. Key takeaways here. Config should be data, not text, right? It's not code. It's not, to me, it's data. We need to be able to query it. We need to be able to mutate. Those are super important for us. Validation and mutation belong way before any of the deployments, and we can desprawl our YAML workflows today with this. All right, so here's some documentation, some QR codes, and then any questions?
Any questions? Let's go previous slide.
Yeah, leave it there.
Leave that up.
Yep.
There's a few things you can read. This morning, you might have come across Artyom Leko, who writes about platform engineering, has written a nice post about the technology as an introduction. And the code for the examples is available. If you can't find it, just ping us.
FluxBridge. And there's an SDK to write your own workers. So if you did need to do validation, say on the cluster, like an OPA, gatekeeper check, we actually wrote one, things like that. You can use that SDK to interact with ConfigHub.
Any questions? Hi. Gentleman with the hat.
Thank you. So when you're deploying these things out to your target clusters, does the actual state of those clusters get reconciled back anywhere?
The actual state of the clusters getting reconciled back
Into Git somehow?
We are not writing back changes directly into Git at the moment. Okay, so, Brian?
Yeah, so the data's in ConfigHub rather than in Git, but we can refresh the state of ConfigHub from the state in the cluster. So we have a yeah, I'll demo that on Thursday.
Yeah, the key idea here is that this is the source of truth, right? ConfigHub becomes the source of truth. No more Git, right? Leave Git for code, right? Leave it for Golang, whatever you want to do, not for config. We're moving it into ConfigHub as a way to, process and reconcile that. That is really key.
Anyone else? Questions?
So you mentioned ops teams.
Yes.
And if you are running scale of 500 clusters, is it possible for them to then go to the UI and see exactly what's running on that particular cluster that is having an issue?
Yeah. So there's the live state, what's called the live state within the UI. And we were doing it in the command line. So when you do that cub get, live state, that is what's actually there.
Yeah, so it's the mental model is a database where things that live in the database correspond one-to-one to that fleet. Now, I'm going to repeat what I said at the beginning about being a bit early here and be very honest with you, that representing 500 things on a screen is a non-trivial challenge, and we're still thinking about that sort of thing. So we want you to come and tell us how you want it to work, whether it's sort of zoom in or more text-based or more query-based or AI-based maybe. There's so many different ways you could do it. William?
Maybe it's a trivial question, but the relationship between units and the deployment units and the cluster where it's deployed is a one-to-one.
The relationship between the unit in the database
yes.
and the unit and the corresponding configuration that's running for a component in the cluster.
Yeah, it depends
Correct.
what you mean by a unit.
So now what my natural question would be scale. Mm-hmm. When these relationships become on the order of thousands, how is ConfigHub system going to behave? Did we think about reconciliation storms? Maybe this is something for Brian for a longer conversation, but
It is a longer conversation. Okay. It's not an issue we're unaware of. But I think it's also important to think about why we're doing this. And part of that reason is that we found that trying to manage all of this stuff in Git and wrapping it around CI as well is also very, very difficult to scale.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And it's going to actually be even more important as people start doing IAC, right? Infrastructure as code.
please not.
I know.
Let's not do it anymore.
I mean, you mess up one thing in your infrastructure, you're pretty much screwed.
It's the combination of Helm and KRM and infrastructure as code. We have another question.
Did I understand it correctly? But it's a SaaS service, and
SaaS, yes. And there's an SDK which is open source on github.com/confighub, and some examples that you can use to build other things. But the core product is SaaS today.
okay, because it's a little bit difficult to use that in a heavily regulated industry.
Well, he is regulated, and he is managing to use it. I understand that some people will want air-gapped offline things. I mean,
you
fully understand
use
that.
GitHub.com or GitHub Enterprise, right, out in the public cloud?
No.
Oh, well, you can. You can. It is possible.
No, it's not.
Okay. Will you do it?
Right.
I mean, I've recently met some very interesting customers in Europe who can't even use American services because of, anyway.
Because
Gentleman at the back with the microphone.
Hello.
So what about the DR capabilities? Do you guys think about DR capabilities, like the ConfigHub is running?
DR capabilities.
The disaster recovery
Well,
capability.
so that was my number one thing I asked, right? When I
We're
said
looking
it.
for brave customers at this point in time.
High risk appetite.
Yeah.
So the config actually is stored in PVC locally as part of that bridge, which is something I didn't talk about. But we always have, that was something I wanted right from the get-go, right? So I needed to have that config. I needed to be able to access it at any one point.
There's a general thing that people ask, not so much about DR, but what if we just want our config back? And that's something we'll give you. You have a parachute where you can take your data away. And that's a slightly different question, but it does mean people know that under certain circumstances they can continue operating. And as Eric said, there are midway solutions too.
Yeah. And long-term solutions we're looking at.
Yeah.
Right, I think we are at time.
Thank you very much.
Wait, sorry.
No.